Voila. Well, welcome to episode 76 of Quarkus Insights, where we have a special guest and two more special guests.
Oh, this is going to go well.
That's how we agreed to, right? Anyway, we actually got a ton of stuff. We got questions we asked last week on Twitter and on our blog for the new GitHub discussions feature we enabled just before Christmas to get some questions in. And we got quite a few. So, yeah. Well, we've all been here before. We got Jason, who's the lead of Quarkus, Aaron, who's the lead of Everything Crazy, and Georges, who's the not newborn dad. He's the new what's it called? Newly minted dad.
It's so great.
That's how it works.
To the world of crazy.
So we will do these questions. And as always, for those who are listening live, you can add questions in, and we will try and fill that in. But yeah, well, I'll kick it off with actually the very first one we got here. So this is from Marshall something. I can't. He's asking, what are the biggest challenges when migrating a non-Quarkus app to Quarkus? Have you experienced problems in configuration, monitoring, or even debugging? That's a very generic question, but so let's start from the broad. Outside and in. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Georges, why don't you start? Because I think you have a specialty in at least a chunk of them.
Sure, yeah. Well, it obviously depends on like where you're starting from, right? So if you're starting from Spring, let's say, then a lot of the stuff is very, very similar. We have like almost all integrations that Spring has, plus other ones. Well, there may be like some stuff on the edge, on the rough edge that we don't have, and like we do, they don't, and the other way around. But the programming model is like very, very similar, right? So like all annotation style, driven by conventions instead of configuration, although you can opt in to configure stuff. So usually, like for a team of developers who is like has Spring experience, like let's say a couple of years of Spring experience, it shouldn't be difficult, right? Shouldn't be difficult at all, actually. Now, again, then if you're coming at this from a Java EE world, then again, like the APIs are the same. It's just that we provide a different let's say packaging mechanism, so you're not going to deal with the app server and things like that. So I would say, like, if you're coming from a world where most Java developers are coming from, which is either Spring or Java EE, then you're going to have an easy time, right? Now, there's this other aspect that that we encountered early on, right? So when in one of the earliest cases with Vodafone, they had a team of people who a lot of the people were coming from like the Node.js world, right? So they were initially looking at Vertex because Vertex, like being everything async and stuff, they thought like Vertex was the closest thing to Node.js in the Java world. But then they really realized that, you know what, Vertex is awesome, but you have to build a ton of stuff on your own just to get like some cross application functionality and like get uniformity between your various microservices. You have to build a ton of stuff on your own. So then they moved to Quarkus because like Quarkus just gave them all that stuff for free. So yeah, like personally, I can't think of any like moderately experienced Java developer that would have a hard time picking up Quarkus, right? Now, obviously, there's probably like specific cases that like will work in one environment, not in another one. But that same goes for like any framework, right?
Some of the places that people trip on tend to be when they want to do native stuff.
Well, native
they get to Quarkus and they want to move their app, and that part goes okay, and then they want to turn on native mode, and then some of the optimizations that we do can get a little confusing. And we've talked about whether or not we should make some of that easier, but like how much we do in terms of pre-recording what's going to happen at static init at build time, and how that can run into some issues with random. if you're using random
But
and you try to go into a native image, it's not something that can be, it's not difficult to fix. It's just people trip on it because it's something different. And what else have I heard people have trouble with? It's usually when they start flipping things to go to native mode. So like the shift over just to
I think it's important to say that Quarkus isn't just native mode. So Quarkus in itself, just the way it works, has less memory consumptions than let's say traditional existing frameworks. So if you're thinking about monitoring and debugging configuration, you have the full, like the whole arsenal of Java ecosystem is out there when you run Quarkus in Java mode. If you do need what native mode gives you, basically it's like super fast startup, and then you will hit issue. You will hit things that, for example, a static init. Like if you've had a static block in your code somewhere that goes and gets. We had one last week actually from professional programmer, so to speak, where he was like, "Why is the user home directory set to my username when I built the binary?" And that was because when he did the build, he had a static init where he got the system property user home, and that got baked into the image. So now, so even if he asked for user home, like in a constructor or some code that is at runtime, then it just works.
Exactly. That's where I see people tripping.
Small things, but I don't think we've yet found a place where that code couldn't be changed, or because it was actually not what you should do, but it's just
that's exactly it, right? Yeah. First of all, most people don't like ever write static initializers in a class, right? And then the few people that do often get it wrong anyway. So yeah,
it's awfully preachy. I got my Java book right back there.
It's just
effective Java that has static singleton patterns.
It's just too easy to get it wrong. Like we get it wrong too, right? And it's not like.
I think the issue is when you're working with properties. When you're working with system properties is the thing. Like static singleton patterns are a normal thing. It's when you're doing static singleton patterns that also work with config. That's when people get into trouble.
Yeah.
Because they expect the config to be read at runtime, but when it's static, we record that at build time. And that's we have great reasons for doing so, but that's when people kind of get caught off guard because it's a little unexpected. But I am not going to agree with you, Georgios, that using static constructors is a bad thing. It's a standard pattern. It's right in the book.
It's not. It's for very, very specific things.
So one of the gotchas back in the EE days that would always happen with static inits is super easy to leak classes and class loaders.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea behind like any kind of dynamic runtime system that you have, so like whether it's say EE or OSGI, there's a whole lifecycle model for how when your code loads, you have some actions you want to take in that initialization period, and then your execution phase, and then finally the code needs to unload. So the problem is static is like permanent. It's like forever. Yeah. So like once you
I suppose if you're going to buy into CDI or OSGI being declarative services, I will agree with Georgios. At that point, you use an application scoped or something that's going to do the life cycle you want, but be managed by the Bean system. All right, I will cave.
Yeah, but so it's like the way to think of it. Here's how I think of it: is static. And sorry, Georgios. The way to think of it is static init is a constant essentially. I mean, that's kind of really what it was designed for in the language, and it is true. You could. I'm not. So I don't want to. I'm kind of. I'm in between you guys. I guess I would say on this one. I'd say it's okay. It's most like it can be easily misused. There are good cases to use it. So if you are using it to pre-compute a constant value for your application that will never change, and it's using base system types, so it's not using any funky custom types, then static init is awesome solution. And that's the reason, by the way, why we do precompile all that stuff in the binary is because it's, if you think about it, like when your Java application starts, it spends quite a bit of time basically arriving at generating things that will never change. So the whole goal, Quarkus compilation, and then especially when you get a native compilation, is that you're only executing stuff that's actually relevant to things that are going to change, things that are actually happening at runtime. So it's totally right, spot on. Aaron, I agree with you. It's like it's a piece that could be surprising for folks if they do something like that. Just once you kind of get the idea of how it works, then it like makes tons of sense, and then like how to split that. Okay, this pattern I'm going to use static init, and this pattern I'm going to use a real simple at post construct. It does exactly what I need, and then it has the lifecycle pattern I expect.
Oh, John, what a troll! I love that comment.
John says, so Java is the thing people chip on when using Quarkus. Correct. That is true.
Yes, no, that is correct, because people like write these static things and also expect it like to be loaded like before JUnit, let's say, right? And then they expect to do stuff in their tests in this static thing before JUnit, and sometimes that will just break apart, right? And you have no idea why. So when you have a system in place like CDI, it's much better in the end if you actually use that life cycle instead of depending on.
And I'm going to show my age here. And remember when we started doing CDI and even it dependency injection back in a long time ago, I remember people complaining about static at that point because they used to construct things, and dependency injection just kind of, now I have to decouple things. So this is the point. So it's not like this is new. It's just Quarkus kind of we pushed the limits on what we've been used to the last 10, 15, 20 years. But I must say I was very skeptical in the beginning, but I must say that now that I've seen it, every time there's someone who comes and shows something that goes wrong, it's like that you don't want that to be initialized at the startup anyway. You want to cache it but don't init it at the very
it is a shift in thinking to really embrace dependency injection, and I think Quarkus just sometimes surfaces when you haven't done it.
But just to answer more of Marshall's questions here, is like configuration. I think we have a fairly powerful configuration model. There's something we will talk about build time init, which the question we can take after here. Monitoring and debugging. Again, debugging for Java is as you're used to. We are working. There is a native debug support too, but it's, let's say, very low. Not very. It is low level. It's more like debugging a C++ application, but it does exist. But I think that we do see that some of the stuff we will improve. But right now, for native image, it is like GDB kind of debugging. Then monitoring. It is cloud native, so we have all the like exposing things through Prometheus and now I've suddenly forgot all the stuff you do, Aaron.
It's not just me.
Sorry.
Just me. But we have micrometer that just turns on a bunch of things. So you get a lot of out of the box metrics, and there's lots of flags to turn that on and off. Exactly. Similar to the notion of CDI, we do a lot less. I've been very averse to dumping a lot of outside of just basic toggle on off flags. I've been kind of averse to putting a lot of that stuff in config. So we use beans to allow you to be a lot more specific about what metrics are gathered, because meter filters are super powerful. So we do that instead. We also have, Roberto's been working on the OpenTelemetry support. So we have a, I want to say feature, bad Aaron, extension for that. And so that one is out. Ken started that. We had the open tracing one, of course, for microprofile, but now we're working on OpenTelemetry integration as that comes up. And that story should only improve. We've got the micrometer team and the Quarkus team involved in the OpenTelemetry space to make sure the metric story is happy as that evolves. That one is still pretty young.
It's not wrong to say that what we try to do is whatever you can monitor on Java side will also be. We want to make sure it works in native image.
Yes, we're like that. Actually, from a migration perspective, too, is something that people trip up on when they go to native mode, because the native JVM doesn't have some things. So people are like, well, where did this metric go? It's like, it doesn't exist. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's one of the. It's some of the low-level JVM MBeans that just are not present They just don't exist in the native binary. So people get tripped up by that. They're like, where did this measurement go? It's like, it evaporated. You're in native mode now. You're a totally different kind of binary.
And even like another thing we're doing also is the JFR, the Java Flight Recorder.
Yes. That one is going to be a little long in arriving. We have JFR. JFR will work. But what I mean specifically is like future plans to be able to pull metrics, some metric readings from JFR, because JFR has some more accurate values than what the MBean will tell us. But that is going to rely on Java 15 minimum, which means it won't start coming into Quarkus until we're up on Java 17.
Well, you can run it with Java 17, right? So
yes, but is the base metrics thing going to have lots of special paths for if you're on Java 17? Is that something I want to maintain? I don't know. So I'm just saying, like, when we get to that place where we're really integrating JFR and micrometer, we will see when that happens.
But I'll say, if you looked at Quarkus like a year or two ago, the situation was decent back then, but it's even better now with the JFR and the debugging and the more telemetry stuff we have in there. So yeah. So it's all okay. So just about compression, there's one here. I'm going to grab down here. What was the question? I think on Twitter. Where was he? From Famarani Julio. Why Quarkus need data source configuration in compile time? So that was this question, but I think it's relevant from here.
I think Jason answered this one actually this morning on a different different thread on Zulip, right?
Oh, maybe I did. I don't remember. Okay, so but I can answer. I can answer this one. It's pretty good. So one of the things we do is we look at. I think I mentioned this a second ago. Is that when we create the native binary, we want it to be something that is only executing stuff that you actually do at runtime. And that's how we get like really small memory footprint and how we get really, really fast startup. So like just compiling your application to native isn't really enough to take advantage of it. Like if you just like were to convert your app and you said like register everything for reflection, enable the whole works, everything that's on the class path, and you compile it all in with Graal, what you find is that your actual thing you produce is really similar to what you would get running on JVM mode. And that's because really the thing that makes it powerful is the fact that it can actually delete code that you're not actually using. So one of the things we do is we try to, we introduce two phases. We have build phase where we essentially lock down what your app is actually going to need. And then we have the runtime phase where you do actually have some configuration variability. One of the things that we find particularly beneficial is when it comes to database drivers, because if you were to say, if we were to include, say, like 10 database drivers and throw them all in there, I don't know if you guys have ever looked, especially modern database drivers these days, they have like 50 million dependencies, which is another challenge I can go on a rant on for a while. Yeah. So like you include all of them. If you compile all of them in, you end up with this really big binary, this really big memory footprint for a database you're never actually going to use. So ideally we strip those out. Now there's a second benefit, which is really important, which is security. So as we all saw with Log4j, right? Like a lot of people who were hit by that security vulnerability, they weren't even like necessarily using the capabilities that were exploited. And that's one of the biggest problems Java has with including everything in the sun and doing all this stuff dynamically at runtime, is that all you have to do to, instigate an attack is to get it to activate one of those code flows that's not really actually used by your application, and then boom, security exploits. So that's another benefit into producing a binary that's tight.
That one was such a callback to like old school days. I was like, oh my goodness. I remember all the JNDI lookups and all that stuff where people wanted automagic things to happen. And that was like when they put that in, like you could see from the comment that they had in their issue, they're like, we don't really know if we want to do this, but some user was really adamant that they needed this because that was back in the day before we had open telemetry, where everybody wanted to do like, they wanted to do their end-to-end trace with all of the IDs on it so they could figure everything out, and there wasn't a good way to do it. And so people did this dynamic JNDI thing, and then everybody forgot about it because we just stopped using that whole area of code, except that it was still there.
Exactly. Yeah.
there's things that, and I just don't know how many people were really aggressively turning stuff off. Like when I wrote the orb stuff, the base of WebSphere, there's some stuff built into Corba that will dynamically execute code. Oh, our versions don't match. Let me get your code and run it. And we were like, nope. No, we are just not supporting that at all. It won't work. We'll try to do the metadata exchange to like get the information about your properties, but nope. Just deny.
Yeah.
Not doing that. But I like a lot of people didn't do that. And at the time, JNDI lookups seemed safe, like strings, you know.
Well, the worst thing is until someone put in a code path where it's gonna be exposed to users' input, and then
that's the other thing that a lot of folks don't realize with Java is that it's so dynamic, right? Like the language itself may be static, but the platform itself is extremely dynamic. You can do anything. You can load anything at runtime, and like that catches a lot of Java developers by surprise, right? They're like, oh.
And it's the fun part is like every time I explain like why are we doing this build time stuff, and I just show. I remember, sorry, one of the earliest fixes I tried to do at Hibernate was to like how do I have a slow to load. And I was like, what's going on? And it turns out there was like 50% of that was done by just class loading. Like that was just pure class loading of your classes took the time. So it's like just the VM was just spending time on it. So this is the thing, like the more classes you put exposed to your app, it will just be slower to start up. Like there's nothing you can do about it.
No matter more memory for no reason.
Thing, right?
Yeah. Well, to get back to, there's two questions. There's a question in the chat that's actually related to the data source question in a way. Also, so I'm going to tie something together. So you guys can...
the other part is because we got used to in Java over 5, 10, 20 years of, I can just wire things in and things will adjust, which is great for something. It's just that every little, I'm just going to add this little bit of flexibility and this little flexibility, which works fine in that specific case. But when you have in a modern app, you have like 10, 20, 30, 100 of these, it adds up. And with Quarkus, you kind of flip it around and say, let's just put it to the minimum again.
Yeah, the question that we have in chat has a tie into Cloud Foundry and VCAP services. And so one of the
which one is it?
It is there it is. So we have for people who are used to working in Cloud Foundry with VCAP services or are used to the Spring Boot model of Cloud Native, if you think about 12 factors and what it actually says, it talks about being able to have your backing services injected dynamically, including failover. Like you're using backing services to store your state, but those backing services are added when you're starting up or at runtime. And Spring interpreted that in a fairly interesting and very principled way. They believe very strongly in it, right? So their notion is your backing data source can be given to you at any time. If it fails, it could be replaced. And so they have code in place for some of their Spring data support around Spring Cloud for replacing the data source at runtime. Oh, this data source died or had trouble. Here's a new connection. Use this one instead, right? That's part of the mechanics behind Spring Cloud config is it will inject a new data source URL with new credentials. And the premise is that the Spring application will discover that and recover. It's part of their failover support. And so when people think about that as, okay, so my backend is going to be dynamically injected, it kind of, wait, but you mean I have to pick one? I have to pick Postgres? I have to pick, wait, how does that work? And so it feels like a constraint because all of a sudden you can't just substitute in different data sources. I think in practice, like we read the credentials and stuff at runtime. So it's not like you're baking in the credentials. And I think in practice, you don't actually swap types of data sources all that often, right? If you're using Postgres, it's a nice idea that doesn't happen in practice.
It's like if you you don't you don't go from Postgres to MySQL at runtime, right? That's if you do that, then you're more courageous than you like. That's Very
right. And there's options. I mean, if you have to do that, if you want your one application that has to run in different environments,
you can.
There's nothing stopping you from having a build variant so that you have the different images at the end, and then you can use it the way you need to use it, and pick an image based on what you have to have.
But you can also have multiple data sources in Quarkus. It's just you get all the downsides that we talked about. But for example, the question that Fabiano is talking about, like how to bind the services from VCAP, etc. So I can't remember the layout for it, but the basic answer is that you should be able to just bind them up.
We don't have the Spring Cloud config wrapper that does the magic for you. Is the piece that's missing. Having written that for IBM Cloud Services, I know what that is. I know what that glue layer is, and I don't think we have it. We don't have the thing that will go dig in the VCAP services because we know what the shape of the credentials are for all the common services, which is what the Spring Cloud configuration thing is. Now, Georgios, I have a question. I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off, but I want to ask Georgios a question. Will the Spring libraries work?
Which Spring libraries are we talking
about? The Spring bindings. I can ask Ozzy exactly which library it is because one of them is old and one of them is new. And
we have our own. We have our own Kubernetes service binding thing.
I am not talking about Kubernetes service binding because the question is about Cloud Foundry.
The answer out of the bat is no.
I'm just wondering if, and we'd have to test it. So like Fabiano, if you want to like raise an issue, I think my question, Georgios, being the Spring dude, is if we can get that library, which already knows all the common services and knows how to map from VCAP services to work based on our other compatibility things that we have with Spring. That's my question.
So someone could try it out for sure, but right now,
my guess is. By the way, I think Eric's commenting on here. I don't know if he knows the answer, but he was saying, he says you have to know the environment variables and inject them just like any other variable. I don't know. I don't know if that means he's done this.
Well, so VCAP services is an environment variable. It's an environment variable that contains nested JSON structures with all of the credentials in it. And the library that Spring has, now see, I maintained the Spring stuff in IBM Cloud, so I do know a little bit about this. So the libraries that the VCAP services oriented libraries, and like IBM Cloud has one, what they do is they say, okay, so within VCAP services, we know what your CloudHint credentials will look like. So we have something that will go and look in VCAP services and look in the right location because it knows, and then it will set the credentials that then the downstream app needs. So the downstream libraries don't have to know about VCAP services. There's this glue layer that understands the VCAP services environment variables and maps it out for you. So that, yeah, Eric, I hear you. Blah, 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 blah. Totally. I'm a little interested that Cloud Foundry isn't dead yet.
So we have this is the first question. Anyway. We spent half an hour. I just want to say the way to do this actually, because the thing is, now I get what Eric's saying here. It's like there's a part of environment that is dynamic. So it's probably like these services, some number that's generated at build time. At runtime.
At runtime, yes. It's a runtime injected environment variable that has all your creds in it.
What's missing is a config source that is aware of VCAP. So
exactly.
So I would say the answer is currently no, but this is very much something that we have the framework and architecture to support if someone wants to do this. So that's
right, and I'm saying the fastest way to do that is to see if the Spring libraries work.
Sure, but the Spring library probably depend on some of the stuff that we are trying to avoid to have. But yes,
maybe. I mean, that's the question for Georgios, right? I don't know how. Look, I think we've already adapted Spring Cloud config and something else. So
okay, so the general idea with the Spring stuff is that none of the Spring infrastructure work, and that is on purpose. What works is wait a second. What works is Spring APIs, but all the like bean context and all that funky stuff, the how they get their stuff to work does not work with us, and we don't want it to.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to look because it might not be worth investing in it. But anyway, blah blah blah.
So what Eric
says, the second question, by the way.
Yeah, there is a property source in Spring that has it. Someone should try that out, and either it can be reused directly, or migrate it and have it as a native Quarkus stuff. So that's where that will be. Okay, Let's try.
So, I don't know if we could. Did we get a conclusion on the answer to the question though, which is the original one, which is changing database types. You don't basically in practice. A lot of let me take a step back. Used to a big reason why people switch database types was because they had to, because it like when you're developing, it was a pain in the ass to use. Like the same database as what you're deploying in production, right? So people use the big conversion they did is they used Hypersonic on the front, and then they switched to something like Postgres on the back end. But with Quarkus and Dev Services now, this is no longer a concern, and it's better because now you actually develop the same database that you're using locally that you deploy to. So you use Dev Services, you automatically get a Postgres instance, you're working with Postgres, your driver's always Postgres, for example, or whatever driver you decide to use, MySQL or whatever, preferably an open source one. But I think that's the answer, is that we think the whole pattern carried all the way through makes the most sense to stick to a driver, and then also to keep your image low and then address security concerns. Yeah.
And I want to say, maybe someone because he says, why does it need data source configuration at the compile time? What Quarkus needs is the type of database. So, I'm Postgres, I'm MySQL, whatever. Everything else is runtime configurable. There are some parts of Hibernate, for example, that was static, like build time only early on. We got the feedback, hey, we need it for some other reason at runtime. But basically, I think today we're down to it's just a type and maybe a few other settings. But in general, it is very little that is actually for data source that is static. Basically, just a type. So username, password, connection URL, etc., can be swapped out in there. Okay. Let's take something completely left field here. JSF view technology. From Tony Hazel, he has a question that's a bit long, but he's basically saying, hey, a lot of people are using JSF. It's as dead as Java. It keeps being alive. Was his kind of word. And hey, could we not support JSF in Quarkus? And I don't think he realized. So MyFaces has done an extension for Quarkus, and I think PrimeFrame there's a few who've done it. So there is actually a JSF extension for Quarkus. It's not part of Quarkus core, which is very intentional because we're trying to not have we try to focus on backend and microservices, at least for now. But anyone who wants to do an extension can do so, and especially in the front end technology, which changes like direction every month or every quarter. But the cool thing is now you can go on Quarkus or our tool. All those external frameworks that we didn't show before, since October or November last year, they are now there. So if you go,
Jason is showing it.
He's showing it. Let's get him full screen if he has it. Yeah. So if you go and search for JSF, and it'll show up there as an option. There's other like Duke and other stuff you can put in there. So yeah, Jason, you muted now if you're trying to say anything.
Oh yeah, I was just saying I probably should screen share so you can see it better. But yeah, basically any and if you haven't used Code Quarkus, you could search for any extension. So we'll say, hey, anytime you have a problem, hey, there's probably an extension for that. So you want JSF, there is a JSF extension. We do flag it as experimental because our primary focus with Quarkus is microservice use cases. That's the thing we're the most interested in. But we, of course, enable anybody in the community who wants to use it for other purposes, including if you did want to use a technology like JSF, you're always more than welcome to contribute a extension to the Quarkiverse. Like in this case, we have a MyFaces extension that you could use if you wanted to use JSF in your application. But again, it's like something that we just enable. It's totally between the contributor of that extension and you as to if it's something that you should use or not use. We find that like in a microservices based architecture, we see people using a lot of sort of client side heavy frameworks, and then calling out to say a HTTP endpoint, which is hosted by microservices. So that's kind of the use cases we tend to think about. But I totally understand the reason why you would want to use a server side rendering framework. Another technology we have that might be interesting is we do have a templating framework called Qt that could fill some gaps. It's not a replacement for JSF by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something that's available. So,
and actually, just next week on Monday, I think we'll have one about Steph. He's been having some fun with server-side rendering. But yeah, as I said, that's outside the primary focus of Quarkus, but anyone can make an extension that does it, and that's the main point of like, if you want to try out JSF, you can. There's someone who's done it, and if there's something you want to see happen, it's possible. Just make your own extension, basically. Okay. Was anyone else in the question here? No, I think we're good. I think it'll be a easy one. I hope maybe. Rest Easy. This is from Martin Pancher. He said, at what point in time is Rest Easy Classic going to be deprecated? Removed from Quarkus in favor of Rest Easy Reactive. Well, that's not an easy one, but
can I say something here real quick? Just
sure.
Say, if anytime we ever remove anything from Quarkus, you'll know about it well in advance and have an opportunity to say, whoa, hey guys, I need this for X amount of time or whatever. So just so you know, like, we don't aim to pull the rug out from under you. We do eventually see the need to move away from Rest Easy Classic. We believe Rest Easy Reactive is a better technical direction for many reasons, which I'm sure Georgios can go at length about. Yeah, so like we don't say like you'll check out a release and suddenly it'll just vanish. You'll get a notification in advance that this is our plan, and then you can contribute in the community and say, hey, can we change this plan to be more like this? And we'll work it out with you.
Yeah, and apart from that, we obviously also want to know about like stuff that's in Rest Easy that you're using that doesn't have an equivalent to Rest Easy Reactive currently. We definitely want to know about that so we can like add that stuff right in.
Yeah.
So down the line, then at some point we can execute on the plan that Jason mentioned.
And I'll say that we've had Rest Easy Classic, Rest Easy Reactive, I don't know, a year in there now.
About a year, probably.
Yeah. And I think what's important to just for people who might not know, the Rest Easy Reactive doesn't mean that your app has to be reactive. It's just that the back end talking to the services, etc., is reactive. So you could be fully blocking whatever and use Rest Easy Reactive for there. What we're trying to do in 2.7 or at least 2.7 and onwards is to make Rest Easy Reactive more the default choice. I'm not sure how much we'll have in place, but the goal is that, for example, our default application gets created has had Rest Easy Classic activated since version 0.0 whatever version of Quarkus. That thing is changing just because we think Rest Easy Classic Rest Easy Reactive is the better choice to use for 99% of applications, especially new ones. But as Jason said, Rest Easy Classic is not going to go away because there are stuff that Rest Easy Classic does that Rest Easy Reactive is not going to do. But yeah, so right now I would say none of this is in the cards, except that we might flip that the default we create is for Rest Easy Reactive, and then it will be in the background for a long time, basically. Yeah. Good. Next one. The next one is like pretty funny because I did this in my former life. From Sikain. He has no name besides the Twitter name Sikain. He looks like he's doing healthcare applications. So he tried to use a standard called FHRI, which is standard medical world to like classify diagnosis and treatments and how much money and etc. in treatments. And it's like a worldwide, like some American standard that a lot of people uses. But unfortunately, it looks like that library that is standard is using a lot of reflection, and it's not the best application for that's out there. And he's like asking like, how do we get this stuff into Quarkus and work with it? And this basically the answer comes back to, well, you can write an extension, and he's apparently interested in doing so and looking for other people to do. So what the way to do it is you go on GitHub Quarkus, and you can open an issue that says extension request. And there we normally people can vote on them or contribute. And if someone wants to maintain a library, like this one will be like what's it called? A Quarkus thing. So it could be hosted there if you want to. And then we can set it up, and then all the stuff about setting up publishing and stuff is done for you. And of course, what we recommend is if is a library out there who is very much reflection oriented, Quarkus architecture is great to kind of circumvent and work around it until they might change. So you can do fixes in Quarkus, or you can go back upstream and contribute to them. Any other comment on this from you guys? It's basically just, hey, does anyone like to do HL7?
So I skimmed the spec just because I saw the question. I didn't do like a in-depth analysis of the project and all that kind of stuff. But looking at the spec, I mean, it looks like it's got just a nice series of REST contracts. It looked like the approach that asked the question was to implement those contracts directly, just using a Quarkus in a microservices approach, as opposed to, say, a monolith EE style application like what was implemented in that other project that was referenced. And I think that's a good approach. Like if you have a usage pattern for this, and if you wanted to share that work and collaborate with the community, I think like Max was just talking about, we do like to encourage community collaboration and would love to enable you. We highlight, what effort you're doing in like our newsletter or, on the mailing list, so that in case other people are interested in a project like that to add to it. I would not look at it from a standpoint of, hey, let's blindly port a big monolith application to Quarkus. And the reason is that you're not necessarily going to get the benefits that you think you might if you do like a straightforward, complete port of a monolith to Quarkus. I mean, it certainly can do so, and you will get benefits from doing it, but it'll also be some effort in the conversion. So it's better if you are moving something to Quarkus to think about to use that opportunity to modernize your architecture in various places. So switching from like say a big monolith to more of a microservices based approach, good, or factoring out a specific service you want to target. Like one example is you could use say a existing app you have that's running part of that API, but then you have one specific API you want to really fine tune for the future. So then you implement that chunk as a Quarkus service. So that's just some general food for thought when you're thinking about migrating anything to Quarkus, to think about that you're using it in the way that we kind of primarily target, and that actually brings a lot of benefit to you.
Yeah. To Sekine, who did this, open the issue and start the conversation, and I know ASL is used everywhere, so I think you'll find people who might be interested in making it happen. We'll have a few easy ones here now. What about SOAP web services in Camel? This is from Donato Marasso. Anyone want to take that one?
I feel
like I've been hogging the mic. I totally could, but yeah.
So
I thought there was an extension in Camel, wasn't there, for SOAP?
We have two extensions. We have CXF for community, and then on the Camel side, there's the Camel SOAP extension that you could use, and there's also a JAX-B extension, right? So you've got like about 3 or 4 different options, right? You could implement the Camel SOAP one, right? Which is good. It's very straightforward. It's geared for documents, literal services. So that's the kind where you've got a schema compliant web service document that's coming into. It comes in as one parameter essentially. It's the most similar to REST, I guess is the way to say that, because REST you typically work with a single payload as well. That's a nice approach. You could, if it is a document literal service, you could even implement it yourself just using JAX-B. It's really just, like I said, it's the difference between REST and web services using doc literal is not that big, unless you're talking about all the WSI stuff. So that's the sticking point. If you get into like, I've got like WS security and WS messaging or all these like WS extension specs on top of the web service endpoint, that's when these solutions would not be a good option for you. You'd want to use an actual full web services stack for doing that. So I wasn't quite sure what which use case was the questioner was looking at. But depending on those, you would pick a solution based on that.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen this question again and again. It seems most of the time it's, hey, I need to consume a web service somewhere. So the CXF community and should be fine for that if you want to. And then there's a few who seem to be in an organization where the whole organization is literally standardized on the way we communicate is web services, not REST services. And again, I think that JAX-B can get you some of the way, but not, maybe not everything. So it depends on the use case, basically.
Yeah, I think in general, just sort of like opinionated advice here. It's a good idea to try to move away from web services if at all possible. Most people deploy REST over web services. So you basically get all the interop benefits that you had with web services, essentially, but with more compatibility across frameworks, and a model that's easier to consume across languages. So that's something to think about. Like if you have something that's written in a scripting language, it's pretty limited overhead to consume a REST service versus a web services service. I realize that's not always easy because you have the service already there. You can't necessarily port it. So that's when you would start to care about these things. There's a couple other solutions you could consider. Like if you want to improve interoperability for that service that's being done, you could put something in the middle that would essentially like translate from, the web service call to, whatever using say like a messaging protocol or using REST services. And the nice thing about that is you could use, like, let's say you could use a project like Wildfly, right? Which has like, all these WS star features implemented in it. And then you could have that be an intermediary between your web service and your clients that are then using like REST APIs and stuff like that. So it's ideally you want to kind of like get off that technology if possible. And then that's where it'll be nice, because then in addition to your Quarkus apps having more native service support, then all your other technologies will actually work better with it as well. But yeah, sometimes people can't. There's an architecture standard or compatibility rules that doesn't make that as easy, but it's something to raise with your team.
I think that, there's a lot of options, and I think also there will be one of the things we are looking at into the next year. It's been a repeated question about at least consuming the services. For now, the options that Jason has is the one to go for. Okay, and I see that's a question. Yeah, well, now we get to. I don't want another one. Again, one of these small ones, I hope. Is Azure Cosmos DB Reactive Client on the remote roadmap? So the thing on our roadmap, I don't think so. There is a. Is there? Do we have an extension for it now? I can't even remember.
No, we don't. So I double checked with Kaman. So he's been on the call. He's been on the show before, guys. He's the reactive expert, essentially. I did double check. We don't have one. However, it does speak Cassandra and Mongo. It looked like from the Cosmo does speak those two protocols. So you could potentially use our Cassandra reactive driver or our Mongo reactive driver to talk to it. We've not tested that, but theoretically that would work. That'd be kind of a nice thing. Some of these cloud database providers, they're seeing the value in implementing common protocols. So there's a lot of emphasis there on support for that. So it's probably a good option to go down, as opposed to adding some proprietary SDK they have specifically for their source. It's probably easier to just use the technology people are already familiar with and that they're already motivated to support like that. Of course, if you have some special features, that it's all unique to their engine, you may have to do something special in some pieces of code. We don't have an extension yet, as Max indicated, but somebody could contribute one if they did find a need for using stuff that was beyond that base driver set. But I would go for one of the standard protocols.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. And then there's another question here. Is that the same? No, just overlaps a bit. Is the Reactor Oracle extension being developed? And the question is, the answer is yes. It's been developed for a while, and I see George is saying it's actually on its way.
Do you know? We've already merged it, so it'll be in 2.7 CR1, which should be out at the end of the week.
Yeah, so that was timely.
See, isn't that great? You ask your question and then code falls from the sky.
That's how it works.
That's how fast it is.
Okay. Well, we actually got through all the questions. I feel like was that all of them? Yeah, I guess so. Can you guys, anything you want to? Oh, sorry, there's one here. I forgot that one. This is the good one. But this is a good one to end on because I'm pretty sure it's gonna be fun. Are there any plans to support a Java module system in any way in the future? This is from Andreas Benkart. And he says support is very vague. He's talking about stuff like adding automatic module name to every library so it can be at least people can try it out. And I know this is a bit of a touchy subject, so yeah. Jason, do you want to give a go on that one?
Sure. So
maybe just explain what is the issues that he might be having. Why would he even want this?
Yeah. So we could. I guess I don't think I would have to see what everybody else thinks, but I don't think we would be opposed to adding automatic module name. I think we have it in quite a few of our dependencies already. We do have an opinion on Java modules, which I think you can kind of see throughout the industry, which is that it doesn't really add a lot of value to your application. I mean, it was a technology that was primarily implemented to improve some of the encapsulation within the JDK so that they could better hide some of the internals so it's not exposed. Part of that security reasons. They also wanted to kind of improve. There is some kind of good ideas in there about sort of separating your API contracts from your internal implementation classes, but this is just my opinion. I think it kind of falls short. So I don't think it really brings your app much of a benefit. We haven't really seen a huge need for it. But we're certainly open to supporting. Obviously, it's in Java itself. So like it's not like we're going to try to prevent it from working or anything. It's just something that we don't see brings a lot of benefit to your app. At least that's my opinion. Not sure everybody else on the panel thinks. So one of you might really like modules. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you one reason why I could imagine this being useful. And this is a very specific, niche case is probably understating it, but it's definitely not a common one. Is that if all our modules had at least a module name and could be considered modular, stuff like JLink could be interesting. So basically meaning, hey, I want to write a Quarkus app, but I also want to distribute it as CLI to users for some reason.
Yeah, the alternate, that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah,
this is like, alternate package for CLI apps is interesting with JLink, but we're not there.
You could use JLink and JPackage to semi-automatically strip down the JVM that you ship with your app and bundle it up and then become a container runtime.
But hey, we have GraalVM for that.
Well, the problem is GraalVM doesn't work on all cases you want to do this in. So because you might want to have a CLI that is a bit dynamic, like our own CLI. So it's a bit thing. So that's the basic. That is, but the thing I must say that you can actually use JLink and JPackage without it being modular. It just saves you from having to specify all the dependencies again. And right now, the way we've done the native image, we actually go and add in all the not all modules, but all of them. So even if you did go and do it, we couldn't cut them out again. So there are things we could do, but all the stuff about API contracts and etc. That kind of, as Jason says, it's not a big differentiator. But for this packaging stuff, it could be useful. But as you said, like we could, as far as I know, there's no danger in the stuff we do of adding automatic module name. So that's just a matter of people like, hey, I want to use this model. Let's make a PR and let's see what happens. But yeah, but again, once you go into native image, the whole module system just kind of, you're better off just looking at GraalVM's native analytics to figure out what you actually use. And it doesn't care about the module declarations. So yeah, it's a bit of but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
Go ahead, Jason.
I was say, one of the things I think is that one of the ideas behind it is that like you would the way that you would trim your package, like say you're using something like JLink, the way you would trim it is you remove one module essentially, right? So the challenge is it's too coarse grained, right? Like you could certainly cut some things out that way, and we already have that benefit in Quarkus, right? So that's like our extensions, right? So it's great. You just cut out the extensions you don't need, so that there's your modules benefit right there. Really, you want to go finer grain than that though, because you may only use a few packages, for example, that's in a module, and so that's where like the GraalVM approach is better, because then you're cutting it down to just those individual. It goes down to the individual fields and types that you're using. So it's really more reflective to what you use versus this like really sort of like 10 steps removed kind of approach on how you would select something as needed or not. And then if you're in a case where you do need lots of dynamic capabilities, then you're probably not wanting to pull modules out, because now you want at least what the JDK is giving you. So that's where I've struggled with it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you could implement automatic modules. We could even do we could even put in the actual module info stuff. But the thing that there is some gotchas with that. The second you convert your app to JPMS, you start to break some usages for anything else that's using just class path. So it's like it's kind of like an all or nothing sort of thing. So that's kind of a gotcha. So the automatic modules thing is actually the better approach. So at least in my opinion, it is. The one exception is at least JLink used to have an issue with automatic modules. I don't know if it still does, if they fixed that or not. Someone who knows this better than me can probably say on chat if JLink works fine with automatic modules. That'd be something to look into if you do use it. But yeah, for us, we kind of don't care basically. Like even if it's modules or not, we would just compile it down to the pieces that you actually needed. It would only be those interaction issues. And one last thing I'll mention is there is a feature, like if you want to do some of the API restriction stuff, there's a neat feature. I think it's in 17. You guys probably remember, is that you can actually lock your inheritance hierarchy. They call it
sealed classes.
Yeah. So that's like a really cool. So a lot of the like benefits that JPMS was trying to do, like some of those are actually showing up external to JPMS as well that you can consume.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I think like JPMS is great for the JDK itself, right? The fact that like libraries and frameworks now can't like arbitrarily do whatever the heck they want on the JDK, change everything, and like have and hinder the ability of the JDK folks to move their code base along.
Be careful what you're saying, because right now we do actually in some places want to change some the JDK's default experience behavior, right?
No. But what I'm saying is that we can't now, like since Java like 13 or 14, whatever it was, we can't like strip, let's say, the final modifier from or the static and final modifiers from a class, right? That we used to be able to do. Like any library that knew what to do could just get hold of the unsafe, do whatever the heck they want. Now you can't do that, which is great, right? Because now that the JDK folks can actually evolve their APIs and their implementation without having the fear of breaking like every single advanced system out there, right? So they provide like APIs to do all this stuff. All the stuff that you need to do in unsafe is gone. There's APIs for that. Which I think is great. But from a user's perspective, I totally agree with Jason. I mean, I don't see the benefit of bringing a module system into user code.
Cool.
That's an awesome point, by the way, because like you want that encapsulation to be really high in the JDK for all those security reasons we talked about earlier. Like you don't want people being able to write arbitrary stuff that just gets executed in the middle. I mean, I probably going to regret those words, because there'll be one thing we'll want to change for Quarkus to make it really. We can just do this magic. We can make this thing. Super. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. So now, well, that was it. We got an hour out of it, and we got questions. The question was asked. The question asked was answered, and we got a few from the viewer listeners. So that was great. I guess that's it. So next week we have Steph on for the Renard thing. We'll see how that goes. So thank you, and see you on the other side.
Very nice.
Bye-bye.